Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. We're going to begin today by hearing further evidence from Mr. Christopher Mort of Siderise. So my first task is to check that Mr. Mort is with us and that he can see me and hear me clearly. Good morning, Mr. Mort.
Good morning. Yes, I can.
Good, thank you very much. Well, as usual, I'm here today with my fellow panel members, Ms. Istefan and Mr. Akbor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And before we resume your evidence, Mr. Mort, I think I better take you through the usual checks, so to speak. Can you confirm that you're alone in the room from which you're giving your evidence?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Can you confirm that you have no documents or other materials with you?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much. And can you confirm that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you that's capable of receiving messages?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much. Well, the procedure today is going to be the same as it was yesterday. Your legal representatives, again, are in the virtual hearing room. We will have a short break during the morning. I'm not sure whether we will have finished your evidence at that point or not, but again, the arrangements will be the same as they were yesterday. Is there anything you'd like to raise before we start?
No, there isn't.
Good, very well, thank you very much. In that case, I'm going to invite Ms. Grange to put some more questions to you. Yes, Ms. Grange, when you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Mort.
Good morning.
When we broke off yesterday, I was asking you some questions about the Siderise marketing literature, and I have a few more questions on that topic before we turn to some of your specific involvement in the Grenfell Tower project. Can we return to a document at SIL 50227? This is the Siderise brochure entitled Cavity Barriers for Rain Screen Cladding, dated November 2013, which we were looking at yesterday. So there's the front page. We can see the date in the top right-hand corner. And I want to go back to page 3 now and look at that paragraph there on the right-hand side in the black text. Now, I asked you about the seal reaction times of 1 minute, but I now want to ask you something else about that paragraph. We can see that it says that Siderise have tested a range of horizontal cavity barriers to the above mentioned standards with seal reaction times of 1 minute and seal temperatures remain below 180 degrees C. And then it says, and maintaining the integrity and insulation requirements. That's what EI stands for, isn't it? Integrity and insulation.
Yes, it is.
Yes, as detailed in table 1 for up to 120 for integrity and 60 for insulation. And then we can see in table 1, can you see that first product there, the horizontal barrier for 120 and 90?
Yes.
And under thickness millimeters, it says 15 by 75. Does that mean that
it's actually 1.5 by 75. That's the intumescent strip on its own.
Right. So the intumescent strip is 1.5 times 75
by
millimeters.
linear length.
Right. I see. Yes. So we can see it saying there very clearly that these barriers can go up to 120 minutes integrity. Can we look at the report that's referred to there? There is a test report with a number 328279. Can we go to that report again, SIL 50212, and I want to look again at page 31. And we get the integrity results at the top of that page in the table. Now we can see from this table that only specimens A and D have achieved the integrity requirement of 120. Do you see that?
That's correct, and that refers to the 120 product in the table of the datasheet.
Yes, so specimen A was 120 millimeters thick. Specimen D was a graphite intumescent. Specimens B and C were 90 millimeters thick and 75 millimeters thick, respectively. Can you just help us as to why, even though only 2 of those have got over the 120, why are the results in B and C not reflected in the marketing literature?
They are. If you go back to the table and go back to the marketing literature and read the paragraph again, it says
Yes.
performances up to 120 minutes. If you
Right,
look at the table, then it has in there for products B and C, 90 minutes integrity.
I see. Okay, so you're satisfied, are you, that they're comfortably within those limits?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Now, this document that's entitled Cavity Barriers for Rain Screen Cladding, if we go back to page 1 of that document, SIL 50227, so that's its title, Cavity Barriers for Rain Screen Cladding. It's right, isn't it, that nowhere within this document or any similar marketing literature has Siderise expressly stated that those barriers have never been tested as part of a rain screen system, but have only ever been tested between concrete lintels. That's not made clear, is it?
Not in this context, no, but as I explained yesterday, testing cavity barriers on the furnace test, the temperatures are higher on the furnace than the failure criteria for an 8414. So therefore, a cavity barrier would not be the weak component within an 8414 test.
Yes, I understand that's your evidence.
And I think the discussion yesterday on the 25mm air gap and the panel movement, I think it needs to be understood that the intumescent at 1.5 thick has an expansion coefficient of 25 to 1. So it will expand to 37.5 millimeters. So it's over-engineered for a 25mm gap.
Yes, I understand you're saying that about the cavity barrier, but this is a document that is entitled Cavity Barriers for Rain Screen Cladding. And I just wanted to be clear on the point that in this document, it does not state, I appreciate you say the reasons why that is, but it doesn't state that the barriers have been tested between concrete lintels and not with a rain screen barrier on the outside.
As I said yesterday, this document contains the reference to the test reports. We frequently supply data sheet and the test report to the end user, so they get the full picture.
Yeah. Now, let's just look at another document now. This is RYD 303992. This is another Siderise document from March 2015. Sorry, no, RYD 303992. And that's got 4 zeros, the one on the page. RYD 303992. Yes, so here's a document from March 2015. You can see that it says version 1.4 March 2015 in the top right-hand side. And this is entitled Siderise RH, horizontal and RV vertical cavity barriers for use in the external envelope or fabric of buildings. And at the top, we can see in the part with the picture, facades, horizontal and vertical cavity barriers for rain screens. And if we go on to page 3, we have some similar text to that which we saw in the document we were just looking at on the right-hand side. And I'm not going to ask you about that again, we've gone through those points, but I want to ask you about some text about the 50mm air gaps on the bottom right-hand side there. Siderise RH50, open state horizontal cavity barrier for maximum 50mm air gaps. Do you see that paragraph?
Yes.
And if we could just go down the page so we can see the text underneath. It says there, Siderise have tested a range of horizontal cavity barriers with 50mm air gaps to the above mentioned standards, with seal reaction times of less than 1 minute. And here it says full closure at 2 minutes 22 seconds. So you are using a full closure figure at this point in the marketing literature, yes?
This is a different void size and a different type of intumescent So that is being used in 25 millimeters. So therefore the reaction times are different.
Yes, I understand that. And I'm going to take you to the report that this is based on. I understand it's based on different products and different tests. But I'm just pointing out that here we had a debate yesterday about seal reaction times. But here what you have done is refer to a full closure time of 2 minutes, 22 seconds, yes?
I believe that is a copy of the text that's within the test report.
Yes, let's look at that now. If we look at that, it's the BM Trada test report. It's a SIL 50288 at page 18. Yes, so this is a table that we looked at yesterday, and I think the 2 minutes 22 seconds comes at the bottom of that page in relation to the time it took for the cavity to seal for cavity barrier A, yes?
Yes.
Now, can you help us? So cavity barrier A was a 50 millimeter gap, but cavity barrier C was also a 50 millimeter gap. And you can see, if you look at that's helped. We can see in the table, it's signified by 2 hashtags, and the 2 hash symbols below show that that cavity was sealed at 3 minutes 19 seconds. Now, can you help us as to why it's the 2 minutes 22 seconds that's in the product literature, rather than showing a range of 2 minutes 22 to 3 minutes 19?
Well, if you go back to the product descriptions in this test report, you will see there's different types of quantities of intumescent in there.
Right.
That is the reasoning why.
I see. So you're only advertising the product that meets the 2 minutes 22 seconds. Is that what you're saying?
That is the product we are using for manufacture, yes.
Right. And you're not using the one that's sealed at 3 minutes 19?
No.
Right. Okay.
As I explained yesterday, these are R&D tests where you put multiple variations of a product on a test to get the optimum result.
I see. And then just moving away from the marketing literature now, but before we go to your Grenfell project work, can we just look at a document from January 2015, SIL 406559. This is an email chain relating to a Belfast hospital project. And if we look in the second email down in the chain, we can see on the 19th of January 2015, Kelvin Williams, that's a Siderise employee, yes?
He was, yes.
Yes. Says to Barnaby Carrick, who's also within Siderise, he says, hi Bar, and he is referring to an email. And he says this, he says in the second paragraph, Chris M issued a statement that all requests for these products would have to be okay by him. Now, can you recall what that statement was and what products that had to be okayed by you?
Yeah, if you look at the subject title, it says Belfast Hospital MSDS and technical data sheets. At the time, we were looking at resource level within the business as to how often we had these inquiries directly through to us to supply data sheets and MSDS information to a customer, as opposed to our website.
Yes, and what does MSDS stand for?
Material Safety Data Sheet.
Yeah.
So it's basically I was keeping a tally on the number of times this was happening.
Right, on the number of times that you had to supply data sheets to customers on projects.
Yeah, whereas as opposed to our downloads.
Yeah, and why were you keeping that tally? What was the reason?
Like I said, literally 2 seconds ago, it was to understand any resourcing level we needed within the business for that part of the works.
I see. So you could understand that you might need to make resources available to provide technical support.
Correct.
For those products, for those projects.
For the products, generally for products.
I understand. Let's turn now to the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project specifically, and if we can start with an email at SIL 6030. This is an email, it's, if we can blow it up a little, it's from Kevin Lamb to Barnaby Carrick at Siderise, and it's sent on the 11th of March 2015. And we can see that Mr. Lamb asks, further to your recent help with horizontal and vertical fire breaks within our rain screen cladding, we wonder if you could assist with what would be the normal fire rating required. And then he goes on, the building is a domestic block of flats, 24 stories, fully overclad with ACM rain screen cladding. Internal party walls will be 120 minutes. In your experience, what would the rating be for horizontal and vertical breaks? This would help us to propose, hopefully, the correct product for building control to approve. So we can see that Kevin Lamb, who is working for Harley at this point, is asking for advice from Siderise on those questions. And we can see that this query is forwarded to you on the same day. If we look at SIL 6034, so we can see that on the same day, the 11th of March 2015, Mr. Carrick emails you, and it says regarding Harley Curtain Wall Limited, and he says, hi Chris, please could you check if the following response is suitable? And then he sets out a response, a suggested draft response. We would confirm that to meet the requirements of approved document B, diagram 33 and table A1 item 15, the area between the compartment wall and outer cladding needs only to be a cavity barrier, 30 minutes integrity and 15 minutes insulation, which would mean that our open state cavity barrier system, and then you give the name of the system, the 90-30 and the 30-30, so 90-30 for the horizontal barriers and the 30-30 for the vertical barriers, would be suitable. Now, can you recall receiving that email with Mr. Lamb's query?
I can, yes.
Can you help us as to what Mr. Lamb was referring to when he says that Siderise had provided him with recent help with horizontal and vertical fire breaks? Can you help us as to what help Siderise had already provided?
I have had no interaction with Harley really prior to this. I believe there was a previous project where we had supplied some curtain wall fire barriers on. Generally, Ricky Kay, who is extremely experienced in this part of the sales, would be giving advice based on what's contained within the data sheets. So there may have been some of that going on. From our email chain, we have no direct correspondence prior to this.
Right.
On the project.
So you can't help us, I mean, we'll be hearing from Mr. Kay as the next witness. You can't help us as to what advice Harley had been, Siderise had been providing up to that point?
No.
No. And we can see that at this time, you were made aware from Mr. Lamb that Grenfell was going to be overclad in ACM rain screen cladding. Do you remember noting that at the time?
No.
Yesterday in your evidence, you said, for the transcript, this is at page 73, day 102, that you weren't aware of what panels were used on the Grenfell project. Now, having seen this email exchange, can we agree that, in fact, you were made aware that this was ACM rain screen cladding at the time?
In the context of that email, I may have read it, but I was more reading the response from Barnaby. Yes,
but in checking Mr. Carrick's response, presumably you would have read the request in the first place, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to help.
But the ACM isn't clarified as to what it is, as in what performance standard.
No, I understand.
What grade it is or anything. Yes, I acknowledge it's an ACM, but there is no grade against that ACM.
Yes, but you knew at the time that it was an aluminium composite material rain screen cladding panel, yes?
Yes.
Were you ever told what type of insulation was going to be used at Grenfell Tower?
No.
Did you ever think about asking for that information as part of providing Mr. Lamb and Harley with advice on the project?
If you look at my further emails where they've asked for further information, I've asked them categorically for specifications, for fire strategy, etc., which they failed to produce.
Yeah, we'll come on to those emails in just a moment. If we now go to your response to Mr. Lamb's query on the 12th of March 2015, if we can go to SIL 6038. So here we can see you email Mr. Lamb on the following day, 12th of March 2015, copying in Mr. Carrick and others at Siderise. And effectively, you have adopted Mr. Carrick's suggestion, yes?
I believe the situation was Kevin Lamb chased for a response. Barnaby was either out on business or on annual leave. So then you forwarded his response.
Yes, and in this email, you've confirmed that to meet the requirements of approved document B, the area between the compartment wall and outer cladding needs only to be a cavity barrier, 30 minutes integrity and 15 minutes insulation, which would mean that your open state cavity barrier system would be suitable, yes?
Yes.
So you've advised on the suitability of your system, given the request that was made. And you say below that, if you need me to comment on a specific detail, please forward over and I will respond immediately. You apologise for the delay, and you also attach diagram 33 so that they can see that below. And we can see from page 7 of this document run that diagram 33 has been provided by you at that time. And you've also provided some standard details, some Siderise standard details. If we look, for example, at page 5, you provided some standard details relating to the Siderise products, yes?
Yes.
We can see on the right-hand side in the label to that drawing, it's headed Siderise standard details compartmentation. Now, you did not in this email say anything about the suitability or risks associated with using cavity barriers in conjunction with ACM rain screen cladding. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct.
Can you explain why not? Why not identify those risks when you were responding at this time?
We were responding as to the suitability of the product for use within a common construction environment. The checks on the cladding suitability, etc., are not the responsibility of Siderise. That's the responsibility of Harley Curtin Walling and the fire engineer and the approving authority on the project.
You didn't explain that your cavity barriers had only ever been tested between concrete lintels and not in an ACM system. Why was that?
We test to the published standard. We are not, it's for, under the CDM regulations, the designer of the project is responsible to understand the overarching regulations required. They should understand the requirements of approved document B on that, and the testing for cavity barriers is in compliance with appendix in the table in appendix item 15, cavity barriers 3015. The overall wall section in section 12 of approved document B is the responsibility of the facade contractor and the end users. It's not, we don't supply the panels.
Why couldn't you have said, for example, something along the lines of, do bear in mind that if the ACM cladding fails, the cavity barriers will be ineffective, and we have only tested our cavity barriers in these limited scenarios? Why didn't you spell out that in your response?
At that stage, we weren't being asked that question. I answered a specific question.
Yes, but wouldn't that be information that it would have been helpful for the design team to be aware of?
But the design team, under the CDM regulations, should be aware of that situation anyway. It's not our responsibility to enforce the CDM regulations.
Yes. Yesterday, I showed you parts of Dr. Lane's report where she identified the potential mechanism of failure of cavity barriers when used in combination with ACM or other metal cladding panels. And you accepted that in general terms, the risks about the way in which these cavity barriers might behave in combination with rain screen panels was appreciated by Siderise prior to the Grenfell project. And for the transcript, that you said that at page 121 yesterday, day 102. And you said it was for that reason that Siderise had called out and requested partners to undertake more testing in conjunction with Siderise, yes?
Yes.
Now, given your awareness of the risks associated with this combination of cavity barriers and rain screen panels, why not spell out these risks at this time to the professionals on the Grenfell project?
But it's the responsibility of the professionals on the Grenfell project to understand this under the CDM regulations.
Yes, but
we are not the designers of the project. We did not supply the panels.
But aren't you in a unique position as a manufacturer of these barriers? You have very detailed knowledge of exactly what testing you've done, the limitations of that testing, what testing you would like to do in the future in order to better understand how it performs in other systems, real world systems. Given you've got that particular unique knowledge, why not spell out more clearly to the professionals on this project that there were risks associated with using these barriers in this context?
There should, and there were people of a higher level than ourselves on this project, like the fire engineers, the architects, the consultants, the building control, etc., who have been through the approval process for these panels. It's not for us to question the approval process for those panels. We only manufacture and supply our barriers.
Yes. I mean, we know that around a year before this, in March 2014, you'd met with Celotex. So we spoke about this yesterday, and you were advising Jonathan Roper that it was very important that these barriers have a solid surface, or I think in your words, a hard bound to activate against. You were spelling that out to Celotex. Why not identify that clearly to the Grenfell professionals when they're seeking your advice about the suitability of your barriers on their project?
Okay, I'll come back to what I just said. Under the CDM regulations and the project, there are people on that project who are contracted to approve and control the process. We supply one component into that process. The overall approval for the panels on that project were not our responsibility.
Yes, I understand that. To put it another way, if you're providing a product into a construction system and you know that there's a risk that it's not going to work well with another product that you are aware of, you're told about, why isn't it reasonable for you to point out that your barriers aren't going to be effective if used in combination with that product?
Again, I'll come back to the same point. Siderise are not responsible for the design of the project. We have to assume that others at a higher level within the project, so the fire engineers, the approving authorities, have done their due diligence and proven that the panels going to be used on the project are suitable for use in the project. That is not Siderise's responsibility. We're not contracted to do that. We give advice on a free basis. We're not contracted to give advice. We give advice on a free basis.
Yes, okay. To your knowledge, can you help us? Was this the first time that Siderise had been contacted about a project involving ACM cladding? Or had Siderise supplied cavity barriers, open state cavity barriers on projects where ACM cladding was being used before this?
Our emails have been scrutinised and passed over to the inquiry. We cannot find another inquiry that contains the words ACM. However, we were supplying material at the time through third-party distributors as well. We could have been supplying materials to projects that had ATM on.
Right.
We're a manufacturer cavity barrier. We do not see the end use of every project. Even now, we don't see the end use of every project.
Yes, but that's helpful. I think what you've confirmed is, so far as you can ascertain, and I appreciate you may have been using third-party distributors, so you wouldn't always know, but so far as you can ascertain, you can't see evidence of Siderise providing their cavity barriers on a project involving ACM before this point, yes?
I cannot see technical queries come through, no.
Yeah, okay. Let's move forward in time now to the 30th of March 2015. If we can go to SIL 6068. This is an email from Ricky Kay of Siderise to you on the 30th of March 2015. And what he's done is he's pasted into this email a communication from John Hoban of RBKC Building Control, which had been sent to Harley, Studio E and others, Ryden, on the project. And we can see that Mr. Hoban is saying in his email, if we look at the main paragraph, he says, please find detailed below a copy of an email sent to various persons on the 20th of March 2015 concerning the topic relating to fire stopping of the compartment floors to the building. I would advise you that is my interpretation of diagram 33 of approved document B is that the detail between compartment floors and the external cladding is not a cavity barrier. Therefore, it must be fire stopped to at least the standard of the existing compartment floor, 120 minutes. Therefore, the methods described in clause 9.13 would not be appropriate in this particular case. So that's, you can see what advice the building control officer was giving, and that's been sent to you. Now, Mr. Kay sends this to you with no covering email. Can you recall speaking to him about it around this time?
Quite possibly.
Do you have any recollection of what you discussed?
No.
Now, you deal with this email in your witness statement. If we can just look briefly at that. So back to your statement and page 5, paragraph 25. And you say here, you say, I believe that Mr. Hoban was confused between the requirements of a fire stop and cavity barrier. This is still an ongoing misinterpretation of approved document B. To this day, I still get professionals requesting 120 minutes fire resistance, despite having explained to them that on testing to BS 8414 part 1 or part 2, the maximum achievable is 30 minutes due to the duration of the test. Regardless of the performance of the cavity barrier, the facade is always the weak link. In this respect, although diagram 33 of approved document B details the requirements, some professionals choose to ignore this diagram and still request that the fire resistance of the barrier should meet with the fire resistance of the floor, i.e. 120 minutes. However, installing a 120-minute fire barrier is not required and will not increase the performance of the cladding element. So you give your explanation there as to why you think Mr. Hoban was confused at this point. Just going back to the main part of that paragraph on the previous page. I think you've made this point already, but can you explain why you're referring to 8414 testing there and the maximal achievable of being 30 minutes due to the duration of the test? Why are you referring to that in this context?
Because you're looking at a system performance overall, and the weakest link in the system performance is not the cavity barrier. The cavity barrier are not magic. 20, as we discussed yesterday, if you have, for example, a fire door tested for 2 hours and you install it into a wall that is 1 hour, the weakness is not the fire door, the weakness is the wall. So therefore the performance of the door, although it's approved for 2 hours, is reduced to 1 hour. And that's exactly the same in this situation. If you've got you can install 120-minute fire barriers. Yeah, on test, they will give you 120 minutes on a furnace test. But if you put them into a system test, they are not the weak link. The weak link are other elements. And the maximum achievable duration of the test is 30 minutes because it's a 30-minute test.
Yes. Did you ever explain this to the professionals on the Grenfell project who were seeking your advice from time to time? Did you ever explain the facade is always the weak link, and you explain this link back to the 8414 test and why it was that part of the system that they really needed to be focused on rather than the cavity barriers?
Unless there's an email, I haven't.
And in terms of why you've not raised those limitations, can we refer back to the answers that you just gave a moment ago when I was asking you why you never raised these risks with the professionals on the Grenfell project? It
comes back to, we haven't got no design responsibility on the project. We are not contracted for design. There's fire engineers, there's consultants, there's architects, there's approving authorities. They are the ones who are responsible for the project.
Now, you say at paragraph 26 of your witness statement on page 6, we don't need to go to it, that it's likely that you spoke to Mr. K about this email, although you're not able to specifically recall. Does that remain the position that you can't recall specifically discussing this with Mr. K, although you think you probably would have done?
Correct.
We can see, moving forward with the documents, if we go to SIL 6070, that Mr. K responded to Mr. Hoban's email. And this picks up on something you were mentioning earlier, that Ricky K goes back in this email to Ben Bailey, John Hoban, and he says, this is the 30th of March 2015, dear all, please can somebody forward over a drawing of the build-up of the cladding so that my technical officer can evaluate and forward an official response with a Siderise product specification. And when he's referring there to my technical officer, is that you that he's referring to?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. And so it's right, isn't it, that you considered that you needed a drawing of the overall build-up in order to provide an official response from Siderise, yes?
Yes.
And if we now turn to the response to this, HAR 404006. So we can see from this that on the 30th of March 2015, Ben Bailey of Harley responds to Ricky K, copying in Kevin Lamb and Mark Stapley for Harley. And he says, please see details attached showing the section through the system and general location of fire breaks relative to window frames in the cladding zone. Best regards, Ben. And then we can turn to the drawing that he attached, or the first drawing. This is at HAR 404008. And yes, just a note in that covering email that Mr. Bailey was talking about, see the attached showing the section through the system and the general location of fire breaks relative to the window frames in the cladding zone. And this is what he's attached. Yes.
Yes.
At this time. And you say in paragraph 28 of your statement, you say, we don't need to go to it, that you weren't copied into this email. However, it was either forwarded to you or shown to you, as you then marked up this drawing requesting 3 sections, which you labelled as AA, BB and CC. So that's the drawing, and we can see the fire breaks on it, the horizontal ones below and the vertical ones on the column, yes, to the sides. Yes. And then if we turn to the next document in the run, RYD 30037412. RYD 30037412. We can see that Ricky K has responded to Ben Bailey saying, to enable us to assess, please see attached markup of section drawings that are required by my technical officer. And if we turn to the markup This is at RYD 3037413. And if we could blow that up, what we see is some red pen annotations on this drawing where you've identified 3 sections, section AA, BB and CC. Yes, can you see those?
Yes.
And is this your writing?
Yes, it is.
And you've indicated that we can see from the label there that you want section AA going through the cladding, you want section BB going through the sill, and you want section 3.3 showing that total section so you can see the whole thing.
The full building.
Yeah. And if we turn now to Mr. Bailey's response to this request for sections, this is a HAR 19401. We can see that Ben Bailey responds on the 30th of March 2015 to Ricky Kay and copies you in. Ricky, as discussed, the 2 drawings attached represent section AA window head and BB window sill, which can be combined to create CC, as we don't have a drawn detail to cover what Chris is requesting. Do you see that?
Yes.
And did that strike you as odd that they couldn't give you the combined section CC? They were only going to give you the window head and the window sill detail separately, but not the whole section?
Yes. From me, I would have expected to see section CC because it gives you the full picture of the makeup.
Yeah. And on other cladding projects, if you'd requested that, would you have normally been provided with that?
It's normal standard construction process.
Yeah. And was it sufficient? I mean, Mr. Bailey's indicating here that it would be sufficient simply to imagine combining these drawings to create CC. Was that sufficient in your view?
With my experience of facade curtain wall design, I could combine the 2.
Right.
To understand what was going on, although section CC would have clarified it.
Yeah. Were you ever given any explanation as to why Harley couldn't provide that full section drawing to you? And we can see that in these emails, people have been referring to fire breaks as opposed to cavity barriers or fire stops. Was it common in the industry at this time for people to be referring to fire breaks as opposed to using the technical definitions in ADB?
It's still common today. People do not use the correct terminology. They mix up cavity barriers with fire stopping. They call them smoke stops. They call them fire breaks.
Yes.
It's common errors in the industry.
Yes. In your experience, does that sometimes have the potential to cause confusion to professionals working on projects if they're not using the correct language for those items of construction?
It depends on how they caveat the definition of fire break. If they say it's a 30-minute fire break, then generally people in the passive fire protection know that's a 30-minute cavity barrier.
Yes. I see. Now, if we go then to look at paragraph 30 of your witness statement at this point on page 7, what you tell us here is that you proceeded based on the information that you'd been provided with by Mr. Bailey. And you say, although I believed Mr. Hoban to be confused as to the requirements as explained above, as Ricky Kay had already explained the requirements of approved document B, and this appeared to have been rejected, I proposed a solution to meet with the higher fire resistance that Mr. Hoban was requesting. And then if we can turn to the email that you sent with that proposed solution, this is at HAR 30188971. This is an email that you sent to Mr. Bailey, Ben Bailey, and to Ricky Kay on the 30th of March 2015. And you say in the first paragraph, I've reviewed the drawings sent over and sketch a proposal to alleviate the issues raised by the building control officer. That's what you mean by BCO, yes?
Yes.
Also, on the second page of the attachment, I've highlighted the weak link, so to speak, in terms of fire, and I think the BCO would have noticed this. Now, we'll come back to that weak link in a moment. You say this in the second paragraph. You say the proposal requires the installation of horizontal 90-60 product in 2 layers, one at the head of the window, aligning with the compartment floor, and the other at the top of the existing upstand. Therefore, 2 layers of 60 minutes protection that overall would provide, if tested, over 120 minutes protection at the window locations. Now, is that paragraph effectively describing that doubling up option that you were proposing as part of this email?
Yes. And it's in approved document B, there is a requirement to, if needed for the compartment floor, to extend the compartmentation to the external leaf of the building. So you're extending the compartmentation to that leaf, regardless of the fire performance of that external leaf.
Yes.
That is documented in approved document B.
Yes. Yes, thank you. And we saw in the first paragraph that you've also highlighted what you're calling the weak link, so to speak, in terms of fire, yes?
Yes.
And you prepared 2 sketches, is this right? The first was to show the proposed solution to the building control officer's requirements, yes?
Yes.
And the second was to highlight the weak link in terms of fire as you saw it based on the design at the head of the window, yes?
Yes.
And they were separate drawings and had separate purposes, is that right?
Correct.
Right. And is it right that you were flagging the weak link point regardless of what solution was ultimately adopted as to the 120 minutes fire resistance?
Correct.
And if we can look at this point at paragraph 31C of your witness statement on page 8. We can see you're dealing with this point at this point in your statement, and you say, my email also refers to the marked up AA, where I identified a weak link for fire. By this, I was highlighting that there was nothing to stop fire in an internal compartment moving to an external cavity. The window head interface with the structure shows that there is a gap. It needed some form of protection. There should have been a design to protect this. As a supplier of a product, Siderise was not obliged to provide any general advice about fire safety and compliance with the building regulations and associated guidance. However, in this instance, I did highlight the weak link I identified, despite it not relating directly to cavity barriers. It was a clear error, and I felt I should highlight it. In my opinion, Harley and/or building controls should have picked it up already. It was their issue to deal with. I would have expected Harley to raise this issue with the main contractor by way of a request for further information. A design should then have been designed and detailed and put in place by the main contractor and/or Harley. So in other words, the design that Harley had sent you showed a gap between the head of the window and the cavity barrier, yes, and you were concerned that that might provide a route for fire spread out of a flat and into the cavity at the head of the window. Is that right?
I'll correct you on that. There's a gap between the structure and the head of the window.
Yes,
That's
I understand.
not the cavity, not a gap between the window head and the cavity barrier, a gap between the window head and the structure.
Yes, I understand. We'll look at the drawing in just a moment, so you can help make that point then when we get to the drawing. And when you said that the gap needed, you talk about it needing some form of protection. What did you have in mind when you drew attention to this?
We're not responsible for the design. There could have been a whole number of ways of that gap not being there. The location of the window could have been moved back to align with the concrete and sealed to the concrete. They could have been metal pressings, they could have been plasterboards, they could have been all sorts of things in there that we're not the designers of it, but from the drawing there was no obvious closure of that gap.
Yeah. Let's just look at your sketches actually while we're discussing this, because it's going to be easier to have it in front of us. If we go to HAR 403948. And let's look at page 2. We'll come back to this page in a moment. This is the point at which you've highlighted the weak link for fire, yes? And is that your writing in red?
Yes.
With the bubble around the weak link?
Yes,
and the point you were just making about it being a gap between the concrete and the cavity barrier. Can you explain what you mean by that?
If you look at the drawing where you have the ceiling level drawn, you can see in dotted line the existing frame.
Yeah.
Of the window. That existing frame would have been sealed to the concrete, so therefore would have given you protection from any direct passage of fire out into that external cavity. Now, the window being replaced, the aluminium window within the cloud bubble, is outside of the building line. The building line being the concrete.
Yes.
So there is a gap between that window frame and the concrete. They've got bracketry and things drawn in there, but the brackets are normally localized to 2 to 3 per window. So there would have been a gap from the internal to the external.
Yes.
How they sealed it or what they sealed it with, but their drawings are very basic.
Right. Yeah. Were these more basic than you would have expected to receive for a project?
It depends. This could have been an installation drawing, and there could be other drawings that give more detail.
Yeah.
There are many thousands of drawings on a project.
Yeah.
We don't see all of them. We only see what we are given, so we can only comment on what we are given.
Yes, I understand. Would it have been possible to position the cavity barrier immediately at the head of the window?
If it did, if you drop that cavity barrier down, it wouldn't have made the difference. You still got the gap between the window frame and the structure.
Yes, I see. And just to be clear, you describe it as a clear error. Did you think that should have been obvious to anybody looking at the drawings?
That should have been picked up by any of the senior project team.
Yes, and by the building control officer.
Should have been picked up, like I said, it should have been picked up by anybody in the senior project team.
Yes. Now, the drawings that Harley sent you, and if we go back to the sketch at the top, page 1, just to be clear, so what you've done on this sketch is you've suggested your doubling up solution on the right hand side, is that right?
Yes.
So you've got, what you've done is above each window you've put 2 cavity barriers, both of 90/60, to give you 180/120 protection. Yes.
Yeah, as you go up the building, you got one at the sill, one at the head, one at the sill, one at the head, as you go up the building. Yes.
And just to be clear, that doesn't solve the problem with the head of the window, does it? That you're addressing
no, not
in the
at all.
next sketch. This was just your doubling up solution for the building control officer who wanted 120. Yes.
Yeah. In reality, the windows should be further into the building to align with the existing structure.
Yes. Now, these drawings that Harley had sent you did not include any cavity barriers at either the jambs of the window or the sill of the windows. Did you notice that at the time?
The vertical character barriers that are drawn on the drawing without knowing the makeup of all the bracketry that's within the range screen system. The verticals seem to be logically as close as possible within that window zone. Again, the fire strategy should be detailing these things. It's the vertical cavity barriers are there. It appears from this to be contained within one compartment. The fire strategy would be the document that would enforce the use of cavity barriers around the windows completely as well. We weren't party to any of that design discussion on the project.
I see. So I think what you're saying in terms of the jambs of the window is that, is this right? That it wasn't entirely clear from this drawing whether or not the vertical cavity barriers were as close to the windows as they could be, yes?
Yes.
Right. And what about the sills of the window? I mean, we can see in the basic drawing that's been sent to you, there is nothing remotely in the location of the sill of the window.
That's why I've drawn it in.
Yes, with the dotted line.
Yes.
Right. So if we look on the right-hand side, that cavity barrier you've added there at the sill location, that's not immediately at the sill, is it? It's still a little bit below it, yes?
In all fairness, drawn there is a schematic.
Yes.
I'm not responsible for the overall design.
I see.
It's a schematic drawing from the very poor drawings that were given by Harley.
Yes, I understand. But did you intend that somebody looking at these annotations would appreciate from what you'd put here that there also ought to be cavity barriers at the sill of the window?
There should be, but like I said, the design team for the project, including the fire engineer and the fire strategy, they should have discussed the locations of all cavity barriers on the project. There should be within the fire strategy, there should be clear drawings laying out the location of cavity barriers and fire stopping on the project.
Yes. Did you ever say that to Harley? Did you ever say verbally around this time, these drawings are very, very basic drawings, you should have something better than this?
Not my place to do that.
Yeah. And did you ever raise this weak link point any more widely than we see in these emails? Did you ever discuss it with anybody subsequently?
No.
Let's return to your covering email, HAR 30018971. This was the covering email we looked at earlier where you sent these sketches, and just looking at the third paragraph down now, you say, please note that without specific details of the overall construction of internal linings and or site of the fire strategy for the project, I can only offer the proposal above. And as this is a refurbishment, I would imagine that the internal linings will remain in situ and made good to openings only, which does not aid the fire strategy. Now, can you explain to us why you said that in this email?
On refurbishment project, it's quite, from that drawing, you can see there's an existing window frame. They do not, on residential refurbishment project, they don't move the residents out. So the existing window frame would have remained in place until the external items have been installed. Then they would remove or crudely remove the internal frame. From that drawing, they quite clearly leaving the frame in place and making good around. It's a refurbishment strategy.
Yes, yes. Did you feel that you were able to advise without sight of that fire strategy for the project?
No, because like I said, I'm a Siderise, we're not contracted to the project for the fire strategy. There would be a higher end fire engineer and or business that would write a specific fire strategy for the project,
Yes.
detailing all the requirements for the safe use of the building in the event of a fire.
Yeah. Mr. Kay says in his witness statement for the transcript, this is at page 2, paragraph 7, he says that Siderise always request as much information as possible from the customer, in particular the fire strategy, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And how might the fire strategy have influenced or changed your advice?
It wouldn't quite possibly have changed my advice that I gave, but it would have given me a further insight as to how this was going to be constructed.
Yes.
But without sight of those documents, I can't really comment on the quality of what that document would have been.
Yeah.
But
Mr.
I would
Kay.
expect
Sorry.
cavity barriers to be defined in the fire strategy. I'd expect compartmentation to be defined in the fire strategy. And that's not just in terms of fire performance, but actual location and where they would expect to see these components of passive fire protection.
Yes, 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 thank you, that's helpful. Mr. Kay goes on to say that fire strategies are rarely provided on construction projects when they're asked for by Siderise. Do you agree with that?
Leading up, roll it back a few years, pre-Grenfell, we would request fire strategies. Quite a few, the initial response would be, well, we haven't got one. Depending on the relationship with the customer, you might say, well, you have got one because you used it in your tender documents. Because as a business, if you attend as a facade business, if you're tendering on a project, the fire strategy should be part of your tender documents that you receive. Now, without fail, every time I ask for a fire strategy, it appears.
Right, yes, that's post the Grenfell fire, yes?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's not to say there are more fire strategies. There is still the same quantity of buildings and there's still the same quantity of fire strategies. It's just now that the facade industry are more aware.
Yes, thank you. Now, for completeness, we can see that on the 2nd of April 2015, if we go to SIL 50158, this is an email a couple of days later from Mr. Bailey to Mr. Kay, copying you in. Yes, so Ben Bailey to you, to Ricky Kay, and copied to you on the 2nd of April 2015. He says, morning Ricky, as discussed, please see drawing attached showing the placement of the fire break at the head of the window. The BCO has agreed to the definition of a cavity, so I believe that the 3015 equivalent product can be used. So he's telling you in the second sentence of this email, yes, that the building control officer has now agreed to it being a cavity barrier, yes? Yes. Yes, and if we just look at the drawing that was sent through at this point, HAR 30014533, what we can see is what was sent appears to be, well, we know it to be one of the Studio E tender drawings. And if you look in the top right-hand side, we can see that Mr. Bailey, Ben Bailey, has highlighted a proposed section. If we could blow that up a little, what we can see is that in this drawing, in fact, the cavity barrier is placed immediately at the head of the window. Do you see that? Yes. Do you remember looking at that? No. When it was sent through? No. And did you ever have any further discussions with Harley, Mr. Bailey or Mr. Lamb about this? No. After this time? And then just again, just for completeness, we can see you respond on the same day. If we go to SIL 50169. this is you to Mr. Bailey and Mr. Kay, 2nd of April, same day. And you say, "Hi Ben, sense at last from the building control officer. So I take it the meeting for Tuesday is not needed. If you need any further assistance in the future, please do not hesitate in contacting us." So just to be clear, did you ever receive any confirmation back from Harley that they had understood the point you were making about the weak link at the head of the window?
No.
And you didn't follow up on that at any stage afterwards?
No.
Sorry, yeah, did you say no just then?
I said no. Yeah.
Right. And given that you were flagging a potential life safety fire issue, did it occur to you to follow up on it and to check that Harley had understood the point you were making?
I had given the advice in good faith to the project. They should be experienced enough to heed that warning, and there's others there who were responsible for the design of the project. We weren't responsible for the design. They could have been using a whole, like I said, a whole host of different materials, not Siderise materials, to close that gap.
Yes.
It wasn't evident from that drawing.
Yes. Can we go now to HAR 30s19012 at page 2, HAR 30s19012. These are some exchanges that occurred in June 2015 on the subject of vertical cavity barriers and some queries that were raised. HAR, sorry, it's coming up now. Yes. So in the middle of the page there, on page 2, we can see that on the 17th of June, 2015, Ben Bailey emails Ricky Kay, subject Grenfell Tower vertical fire breaks. And he says, "I'm after some technical advice. We're putting vertical fire breaks up the building where they are party walls. I've marked where these are on the attached drawing. Will we have to install the verticals anywhere else, like on the corners of the building, so we don't fall foul of some regulation, etc." So that's the request. And then we can see from the bottom of page 1 in this chain, if we go up to the bottom of page 1, that Mr. Kay forwards this email to you for a response. He says, "Hi Chris, please may I ask you to respond to below email from Ben with some advice about the location of the vertical fire barriers, marked up drawing attached." And then we can see from the top email of page 1 that you respond and you say, "Hi Ben, we need further information in order to respond as follows." This is you to Ricky Kay, copying in Ben Bailey. And you say you need elevations, the fire strategy report, and then NHBC or not. And then upon receipt, Barnaby will be able to respond accordingly. Now, just can you explain briefly why you considered that you needed those documents to be able to provide a response?
They had only sent over a blurred floor plan of the building, just one section out of the building. In order to understand how the floor plan is made up, you need more information. And this is, again, you see, I'm asking for the fire strategy, because in the fire strategy, it should be clear as to where the vertical breaks are.
Yes.
In there.
Yeah.
I'm asking about the NHBC or not, because approved document B requires vertical barriers at party wall locations or change in direction on the building. NHBC, I've got a higher requirement that they require them every 6 meters.
Yeah. So
I just needed to understand what was required for that element of works.
And you've told us at paragraph 35 of your witness statement, we don't need to go to it, that you cannot recall and can find no trace of ever receiving these documents or a response to these queries from Harley. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you remember ever chasing up on this request?
It'll come out in the next chain of emails. This was happening very, very quickly. I sent this email and then a phone call between myself and Ben Bailey to agree the locations on them.
Right.
They're under pressure on site to get this work done.
Right.
So this is normal. It happens in the construction industry all too often, unfortunately. You put a request information and then you get an irate site manager on ranting, wanting information now.
Yes.
Without giving you the full picture.
Yes, I see. Yes, let's turn to that email. If we go to SIL 50108, this is an email from Mr. Ben Bailey to you, dated this 22nd of June 2015. And he says, Chris, to confirm my understanding from our conversation, we need vertical fire breaks on the columns, grids A1, A5, D1, D5, as well as the party walls, ? So as you just said, a conversation happened on the telephone, yes, where Mr. Bailey pressed you for advice?
Yes.
Yes. How were you able to give advice to him if you hadn't received the documents you'd requested?
That would have been discussed during the phone call. It would have been a case of, we just need to know, are they needed on various locations, which I confirmed to him. And there should be a diagram here marked up where they are required.
Yes.
So I was just responding to the information that was given. They didn't have, whether they didn't have the fire strategy or the other documents, I can't say, but certainly from the timescale of the date stamp and timestamp on my request to this phone call, it's a case of the emails received and phoned in before the end of the day to get this resolved. Yes,
yes. Would you agree from this exchange and from other exchanges that we've seen that Harley was relying on you and Siderise generally for design advice in relation to cavity barriers?
I wouldn't say it's design advice.
How would you categorize it?
It's they're looking for advice as to the locations of the cavity barriers. We're not responsible for the design. They should themselves be fully conversant with the location requirements of the cavity barriers from approved document B and from the fire strategy on the project.
Yes. Did it concern you that Harley appeared to be dependent on your advice as to where to place cavity barriers and did not appear to have any independent expertise in the matter?
Even today, we still get queries even from facade consultants and fire consultants as to, can you clarify the location of cavity barriers? Right. So it's not unique to Harley. We still get inquiries today.
Yes. And back then, was that normal at the time for a specialist cladding subcontractor to repeatedly approach a manufacturer for advice on cavity barriers?
Yes.
And just finally on this topic, did you ever provide Harley with any advice about the positioning of cavity barriers within the architectural crown at the very top of the building?
I wasn't even aware there was a crown.
Right.
Of the building. Like I said, if in that email, well, I've asked them for the elevation drawings, the fire strategy, that thing, if they had supplied that information to me, I may have been able to see what else was going on, but we can only respond to the information that we are given.
Yes.
We're not contracted as part of the design team, so we don't have access to all the documents.
Right. Now, my final topic is about installation and post-fire inspection. If we go to paragraph 55 of your witness statement on page 14.
Strange, forgive my interrupting you, but do you have any idea how long this final topic might last?
It's fairly brief, Mr. Chairman. I've got about 6 or 7 pages of notes. I may not get it done in 5 minutes, but I would be reasonably confident of getting it done in 10 to 15 minutes if I could be permitted to keep going, and then we can have the morning break. at which time further questions could be suggested.
Right. Well, I'm happy to do that, but I thought we ought just in courtesy ask Mr. Mort. Are you happy to carry on a bit longer, Mr. Mort, while we try and finish this line of questions?
Yes, certainly.
Good. Yes, well, on you go then, Ms. Grange.
Thank you very much. So if we go page 14, paragraph 55, you tell us there that on the 18th of July 2018, so just over a year after the fire occurred, I attended Grenfell Tower to review the installation of the remaining cavity barriers on the project in areas of undamaged cladding and fire damaged cladding. And then you provide us with a number of comments. And is it right that at that inspection, you were able to inspect the installation of the remaining cavity barriers, both in areas of undamaged and fire damaged cladding? Yes?
Yes.
And then between paragraphs 56 and 60 of your witness statement, you set out basically a list of problems that you identified with the installation of the cavity barriers, yes?
Yes.
Now, I don't want to spend time reading that all out. So what I'm going to endeavour to do is just to summarise the problems you've identified, but please do correct me if I've summarised them unfairly or incorrectly. So at paragraph 56, you're essentially saying that in some locations you are unable to identify support brackets or holes for support brackets, which suggested to you that cavity barriers either had not been installed at all or had been installed incorrectly without support brackets and perhaps with some silicone, yes?
Yes.
What would be the effect of installing the cavity barriers with silicone rather than support brackets?
They're not installed in accordance to our guidance and in accordance with how they're tested.
Yes.
So therefore, they're non-compliant.
Yeah. Then at paragraph 57, that begins at the bottom of the page we're looking at there, you tell us that in areas where the cladding was undamaged, the horizontal cavity barriers you observed were not installed in accordance with published installation guidelines. And in particular, the gaps were too wide and therefore would not have been closed by the intumescent, yes?
Yes, we talk about very large differences in installation guidance. Instead of being a 25 millimeter gap, you've got a 140 millimeter gap. That's way beyond any form of sensible parameters.
Yes. And in respect of vertical cavity barriers, you notice that in some places the horizontal support brackets had been used, thereby piercing the end of the cavity barrier, yes?
Yes.
Now, just to be clear, from recollection, when you looked at the vertical cavity barriers, did you actually see full fill vertical cavity barriers having been installed in that vertical position?
There were vertical barriers in there, but there was gaps and things without seeing the photographs of the full report. Like, it's difficult to
yeah.
comment.
It's just because a number of the inquiry's experts have seen horizontal barriers, and we have photographs of those installed in the vertical position. Did you see any evidence of that?
We only could see the barriers that were there at the time. They could have been removed.
Right, I see. And that piercing that you drew attention to, piercing the end of the cavity barrier, the vertical cavity barrier, what would be the impact of that piercing in terms of its fire safety properties?
If you go back to my notes, I'm almost certain the piercing actually indicated that there was a clear void from the end of the vertical barrier to the cladding.
Yes.
So the vertical barriers were totally ineffective. They weren't installed in accordance with their guidance and weren't installed how they've been tested.
Yes. And I think at paragraph 60 of your witness statement, you actually tell us that the vertical cavity barriers had air gaps of up to 50 millimeters.
Yes.
Meaning that the compartments were not sealed. So they're supposed to be full fill cavity barriers installed under compression, yes?
Correct.
And in fact, they've got gaps of 50 millimeters, yes?
Yes.
So that would render them ineffective, is that right?
Correct.
And because they don't have intumescence, do they? So
that's correct.
Yeah. And then just for completeness, at paragraph 59, you also tell us that, as with the horizontal barriers, there are areas where you were unable to identify support brackets or holes for the vertical cavity barriers, suggesting that either they were not installed at all in those locations or they'd been installed incorrectly, yes?
Yes.
Overall, how would you characterize what you saw during that inspection in terms of the quality of the cavity barrier installation?
It is probably of the poorest standard I've ever seen.
Right. And you tell us at paragraph 61 of your statement at the end of page 15 that if you had been asked to inspect the installation during the construction, and it follows logically from your previous answer, that you would have said they were non-compliant and you would have instructed corrective actions, by which I think you mean remedial work to take place to correct all of it, yes?
Yes, we are very, there's no grey area when it comes to inspection. It's either right or it's wrong. If it's wrong and it's a minor and can be corrected, it gets corrected. If it's significantly wrong, like these barriers were, they'd have to be removed and replaced with new material.
Yes. Would it be fair to say that these were fundamental errors in the installation that no reasonable installer should have been making?
Correct.
Now, we know it was Osborne Berry that installed these cavity barriers. Did you have any prior experience of working on projects in which Osborne Berry were involved?
No.
And what about Harley's installation ability? Had you ever provided installation advice to Harley previously?
I believe there was one previous project, which was a curtain wall project, where an old contact of mine, Terry Nichols, requested some assistance on site, which I handed over to Ricky Kay.
Yes, we're going to come to that in just a moment. Can we just turn to something called the ASFP Red Book? This is a SIL 402093. This is dated June 2016, just to be clear. So this is the Red Book of Fire Stopping by the ASFP, Fire Stopping Linear Joint Seals, Penetration Seals and Cavity Barriers, 4th edition. Did you have any involvement in the creation of this guidance?
Yes, I did.
And if we go to page 67, under section 9.2, there's a section headed Installer Certification. And in the first paragraph, it tells us that third-party certification for installers is a process whereby the contracting company employs appropriately trained, competent staff to install the required passive fire protection system. And their work is independently audited by site inspections from the third-party organisation, and a full record system is required as part of the scheme. And then it tells us what an installer certification check involves. And then if we look below that bold text, 2 paragraphs down, it says the ASFP recommends that all passive fire protection is installed by third-party certified installers, certificated installers. In the case of fire stopping, this is particularly important as fire stopping is often covered up and inaccessible after installation. So it is important to get it right on installation. So presumably, as you were involved in this guidance, you would have been familiar with these recommendations, yes?
Yes, and similar recommendations appear in approved document B.
Did you ever have a conversation with Harley about whether they ought to be carrying out the installation of the Siderise cavity barriers using third-party certified installers?
No, I wouldn't have had that conversation with them.
Did you ever discuss in any way that the competency of the installers ought to be evaluated by Harley?
No.
And then just finally, that Wayland House project that you mentioned, if we go to SIL 50321 at page 2, this is an email dated the 19th of December 2014. It's in relation to the Wayland's House project. and the subject is fire break Lamatherm, and it's from Ricky Kay to Terry Nichols of Harley, but it's CC'd to you. Do you see that?
Yes.
And just for context, Mr. Swales tells us at paragraph 66 of his witness statement, we don't need to go to it, that Siderise had supplied cavity barriers to Harley on 4 separate projects in 2014 to 2015, and one of those was Wayland House. Does that sound right to you?
I wouldn't have an overall view of what sales
Right.
would have sold.
Right. To your knowledge, was this the only other time that Siderise had inspected the work of Harley on a project?
It was a function of Ricky Kay's duties. If it is the only one, it is the only one. I wouldn't be aware of Ricky's every day-to-day movements.
Right, yeah. And then we can see from the content of the email that Mr. Kay, he says, from my visit to site on the 17th of December, I'd like to make the following comments with regard to the install of our Lamatherm. This is the curtain walling fire stopping system in a vertical application on your development at Wayland House, yes?
Yes.
So this is curtain walling, it's not cavity barriers in cladding, yes?
Correct.
And it would appear that Mr. Kay had attended Wayland's house to undertake an inspection. Just to be clear, was Siderise ever requested to undertake a similar inspection at Grenfell?
No.
Was that service ever offered to Harley, the inspection service?
That would have been part of the normal sales negotiation and discussion between Ricky and Harley Mullen. It's a service we offer and have offered since I joined Siderise in 2002. It's always a service level.
Right.
We've always offered it.
And we don't need to go to all the detail of the email, but I'm going to summarise. It appears from the text of the email that Mr. Kay found a number of problems based on his inspection, including some fire stops being installed in an incorrect orientation, some had been installed under insufficient compression, there were concerns over whether the correct quantity of brackets had been used, some of the fire stops had been cut too small or cut poorly, leaving gaps. Now, would you agree that a number of those installation issues do appear to be similar to the problems you identified on your inspection of Grenfell Tower after the fire?
Different product, different magnitude.
I see. So
they looking at this, there are issues there, but they're nowhere near the magnitude of the issues that were on Grenfell.
I see. So just to confirm, did this prompt any consideration within Siderise as to whether you ought to be offering to inspect the works at Grenfell Tower just a few months later?
Like I said, I wasn't responsible for the account. I wouldn't have put the two together.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you for that extra time. I've come to the end of my questions.
Right.
We perhaps have the normal morning break and then we can take in any further questions.
Well, just so you understand where we are, Mr. Mort, we'll take our morning break now. We always have a break when council have finished asking questions, just to give them a chance to check there's nothing they've overlooked, and also to give other people who are following the hearing a chance to suggest further questions. So it's not quite the end. We'll come back at 11:45, please, and at that stage we'll see whether there are any more questions that we need to ask you. All right?
Okay. Yes.
And as before, please, no talking to anyone else about your evidence or anything to do with it while we're on the break.
Okay.
All right, good. See you in a bit later on. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. We'll now see whether there are any more questions for Mr. Mort. First thing is to check that Mr. Mort can see me and hear me. Can you, Mr. Mort?
Yes, I can.
Good, thank you very much. Well, Ms. Grange, do you have any more questions for Mr. Mort?
Yes, just one question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mort. So we saw this morning that you did review the system design drawings and you identified the weak link, despite, in your own words, it not being relevant to the cavity barriers and it not being your responsibility. Can you explain how doing that is consistent with your reasons for not alerting Harley to the risks and limitations of cavity barriers in an ACM rain screen system?
The system, or the facade designers plus the whole project team, should be aware under the CDM requirements of all the relevant approved documents, not just approved document B, but A, L, M, K. Whatever approved document is relevant to that building, the project team should be fully aware of that document and the requirements of that document and the requirements of the testing needed to comply with those documents. The weak link was such a glaring, obvious issue that I had to highlight that. There was I could not see how that was designed to be closed.
Yes, I see, but how is the risks and limitations of cavity barriers in an ACM rain screen system, how was that to be gleaned from the relevant approved documents at the time?
It's within the section 12 of the external wall section of approved document B. Like I said, we manufacture and supply cavity barriers. We're not responsible for the external wall design, our panel choice or panel testing. That's the responsibility of the project team. And we have to assume that they've done their due diligence and complied with that section.
Right. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are all the questions that we have for this witness.
Right, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Mort, not as many questions as there might have been. Anyway, it just remains, I think, now for me to thank you very much for making yourself available to give evidence to the inquiry. I think all the members of the panel have found it really interesting and helpful to hear what you've been able to tell us. And so we are very grateful for your willingness to give evidence. There aren't any more questions for you. So now it's sufficient for me to say, well, you're free to go. And thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.
Right, at this stage, we will have another short break while we reorganize matters for the next witness. So that will take 10 minutes or so. I'm going to say that we will aim to resume at midday with the next witness, or as soon as possible when all the arrangements have been made. Good, thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. I'm sorry about the delay, which has been slightly longer than we were expecting, but we are now ready to go on. And our next witness is Mr. Richard Kay of Siderise. I'm just going to check that he's there and able to see me and hear me clearly.
Yeah. Good afternoon.
Good morning, Mr. Kay. Now, you should have on the screen in front of you the words of the affirmation, which I think you're going to make. Do you have that there?
I do, yeah.
Could you please then make the affirmation by reading out the words in front of you?
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, we have to go through one or two formalities before we actually start taking your evidence. Can I ask you, please, to confirm that you're alone in the room from which you're giving evidence?
Certainly.
Is that right? Yes?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you. Can you confirm that you have no documents or other materials with you?
That's correct.
And can you confirm that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you that's capable of receiving messages?
That is accurate and correct, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, you might like to know that your legal representatives are in the virtual hearing room. That is, they can follow your evidence. They have the power to intervene if they think it really urgent, but we have other means of their contacting our counsel if there are problems. So I'm going to ask them to keep their microphones and cameras switched off in all other circumstances. I hope we're not going to have problems with the sound or the vision, but if we do, we'll have to take a short break while the technical support people iron them out. We'll have a break for lunch at the usual time, and we also have a break halfway through the afternoon. If you need an additional break at any time, will you just indicate that and we'll try and accommodate you. Is there anything you'd like to ask me or raise before we start taking your evidence?
No.
Right, thank you very much. Well, in that case, I'm going to ask Mr. Laking to put some questions to you. Yes, Mr. Laking, when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the panel. Thank you very much, Mr. Kay, for attending today to give evidence. It's very much appreciated. Can I start by confirming that you can see and hear me clearly?
Correct, I can, yeah.
Thank you very much. If you have any difficulty understanding any of the questions that I ask you, please ask me to repeat them or to put the question in another way. And if you feel you need a break at any point, as the chairman has said, please just let us know. Please also try to keep your voice up so that the transcribers who are on this call and are writing down what you say get a clear note of your evidence.
Absolutely, we'll do.
And one point that we ask all the witnesses, a nod or a shake of the head doesn't go down on the transcript, so please endeavour to say yes or no in answer to the questions. Thank you very much. You've made one witness statement, so could I please take you to that? It's a SIL 50304, please. Can I ask you to confirm, is that your witness statement?
It's correct.
And if we go to the last page, that's at page 10, we can see it's dated the 28th of September 2018. And
Yep.
Is that your signature?
Indeed, yeah.
And have you had an opportunity to read that witness statement recently?
Yes, I've reviewed my witness statement, yes.
And can you confirm that the contents are true?
Absolutely, 100%.
Have you discussed your statement or your evidence with anybody else before coming here to give evidence today?
No.
So I'd like to start with some questions about your background and your experience and your role at Siderise. At paragraph 3 of your statement, that's at page 1, you say you've been employed by Siderise since the 1st of April. Could we just have a look at that in the second line? Do you see that there?
Correct.
Can I ask what you did before you joined Siderise?
I actually had a year out, went travelling, but prior to that, my previous employer was Hilton, GP, so within the construction sector, where I acted as manager of the Portsmouth Hilty Centre before being then out on the road as one of their external sales representatives. So I then left there sometime in 2010 Took a year out, like I said, went travelling, came back and joined Siderise due to my previous experience at Hilti.
And how were you recruited to Siderise?
My father was working for Siderise at the time. There was an opportunity that came up for a external account management role, in the construction account manager role, which I applied for, went through the standard interview processes, and secured the job based on my previous experiences at Hilti.
Now, is it right that you were initially employed as a construction account manager? Is that right?
Yeah.
And what were the qualification requirements of that role?
It was mainly a sales role, so there's not too many qualifications to be a sales account manager required. It was really based on my experience with Hilti. I'll be selling to similar clients. My target market was similar, being construction accounts, because it was more generalist. Obviously, we have systems that are not just suited for facade sector, and at the time, my role was looking at interiors and facades when I was first employed for the business. So yeah, it was a broad spectrum of sort of target market for our range of products at the time.
Yes, I see. And would it be fair to say, therefore, that the role didn't require any technical qualifications?
No, I mean, obviously we had dedicated technical resources within the team. So yeah, it was more sales, business development, commercial perspective.
And do you hold any technical qualifications?
No official technical qualifications, just outside of obviously my product knowledge within the business. I have to have a clear understanding of how our systems perform, the applications they're used in. I wouldn't be very good at my job if I didn't. So yeah, I have a clear understanding of our products and their applications.
Yes, I see. And prior to joining Siderise, had you had any training or education in the application of the building regulations or the guidance in approved document B or any of the other approved documents?
It was something I picked up on. I mean, it's part of our standard CPD delivery. So as part of the learning curve for my job role, frequently delivering scripted CPDs that are scripted by, our marketing and technical teams at the time, to ensure that the external sales teams are delivering the same message to the wider market. So yes, my understanding was really learnt from frequent delivery of things like CPDs.
When you are talking about CPDs there, just to clarify, that's continuing professional development that you gave rather than continuing professional development that you were subject to. Is that right?
Yeah, obviously I shadowed many of our more senior people within the business prior to them me taking over and conducting CPDs myself. But like I say, the presentations were scripted, so you're going as per our marketing and technical teams' clear instructions. So, but yeah, obviously as you're presenting it, you're learning about it. So that's kind of how I learned about the regulatory requirements surrounding the products that we were specifying for use or selling for use on projects.
And prior to joining Siderise, had you had any training or education in respect of fire engineering?
No.
And at the time of the Grenfell project, were you a member of any professional bodies or organisations?
Not personally, no.
You say at paragraph 3 of your witness statement, so that's SIL 50304 at page 1, that you were promoted to National Facades Manager in 2015. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And you confirm that at the time of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, you were the National Facades Manager. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Do you recall whenabouts it was in 2015 that you were promoted?
Not specifically, probably at the start of the year. I would have thought, as just part of the end of year review of roles within the business, I would have assumed it would either be end of, so 1st of April, end of financial year, or it would have been as of January 1st. So one of the two. I can't be sure.
You can you describe what this new role involved, the role of National Facades Manager?
Because prior to that, being construction account manager, which was being more of a generalist, looking at interiors, looking at facades, we realised our focus product range was more applicable to the facade sector. And it was an area of the market which we wanted to focus on and look to generate sales. We felt we had a market leading offer at the time from a site service and technical and product testing perspective. And we wanted to put a lot more focus onto that to that market sector. So I was moved into that role as a more, like I say, market specific role rather than just being a generalist construction account manager.
And can you briefly explain your role in the hierarchy of positions at Siderise?
My role in the hierarchy of positions, I mean, at the time, being National Facades Manager, that wasn't management of any particular team. It was me covering the country, living down in Brighton, not ideal geographically, but I certainly did a lot of travelling back then. So yeah, it was really managing our national set of accounts. So when it's National Facades Manager, there was no particular team working underneath me. It was just me covering the country from an account management perspective of our target facade set of contractors.
And what about senior to you? Who did you report to?
Back then, I was reporting to, it might have been my father at the time for a very short period of time, and then Christopher Hall, who was brought in as sales director for the business. Not entirely sure off the top of my head of the timeframes there. But yeah, it kind of coincided with when I moved into the National Facades Manager role. My father then moved into more of an export role, so global role, and at which point then both of us reported directly to the new sales director. Or he might have been called commercial director back then, I'm entirely sure of the role, but that would have been Chris Hall.
And are you still employed by Siderise?
Indeed, yeah.
In general terms, and very briefly, can you explain to us what products Siderise manufacture and provide?
On my side of the business that I work for, we have our special products side that are very separate to us, but they are cavity barriers and fire stops for various facade types, be it masonry, ventilated rain screen, curtain wall system, as well as various acoustic upgrades that we can provide to assisting with noise control in curtain wall buildings as well. So that, in terms of product range that I look to promote, obtain specifications for and sale, they are the set of product ranges that I predominantly deal with on a daily basis and target for sales.
Yes, and at paragraph 4 of your statement, you say that your role was to look after key accounts and to generate new accounts for the business.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you what you considered a key accounts to be?
The market leaders, the guys that were taking on the biggest contracts, and obviously the contractors that we wanted to be working with on the most iconic projects. A key account for us could be based on current level of spend for an existing customer, or if they're a prospect, what their potential level of spend would be. And yeah, they were ones that I was targeted with focusing for direct business.
Now, we'll discuss Siderise's relationship with Harley in more detail later, but was Harley considered a key account?
Not because they weren't an already purchasing account. They were one of a list of my key development accounts that I was sort of targeting, knowing that they secured quite a significant amount of work in around the London and South East area. And yeah, there were knowledge of some of the personnel that worked there, and felt that we perhaps, due to relationship, may get a shoe in, on my standard approach when I was prospecting with him, which is a part of my role.
What about Celotex?
What about Celotex?
Were they considered to be a key account?
They would never have been a company that would have ever procured our materials, so no, they would not be anyone that I would have been proactively looking to engage with, no.
Can we turn to Mr. Swales's witness statement briefly? That's at SIL 50306 at page 8. I want to look at paragraph 31. Now, Mr. Swales is the Chief Commercial Officer at Siderise, is that right?
This is correct, yeah.
And if we have a look at paragraph 31, it says there that Siderise recognise that installation is crucial to the function of its product. And so we do provide assistance, either through instruction via the data sheets and/or on-site training. Additionally, in September 2016, a YouTube video was launched, as well as the app January 2016. In addition to installation training, post-installation inspection is also offered. There is no additional charge for this. There has, however, traditionally been a slow uptake to this, which is why we clarified the extent of the Siderise site services offer and actively began to promote these in 2016. Part of this was the development of an app that would provide assistance to contractors to correctly install the materials and subsequently inspect and report on the installation. The use of the app provides a standardized and detailed means of checking that the key elements of product installation have been undertaken correctly. So while pausing there, we can see that the app was launched in January 2016, but Mr. Swale sets out at paragraph 29, we don't need to turn to it, that it was trialed during 2015 with some of Siderise's key accounts. To your knowledge, was Harley involved in that trial?
No, no.
What about Celotex?
No.
I'm sorry, I spoke over you. Do you want to repeat that answer?
No, Harley were not involved with any part of the development of the app, or it wasn't trialled on any of their sites.
And what about Celotex? Were they involved in its development?
Again, we wouldn't be inspecting, Celotex wouldn't be procuring or installing our materials, so we wouldn't inspect Celotex materials, so we'd only ever inspect our own, and like I say, they were not an installer of our products, so no.
And as at the time of the Grenfell Tower project, did key accounts qualify for different or better services from Siderise?
I wouldn't say different or better. Maybe frequency of visits that we'd offer, and in terms of complimentary visits, would be more prepared to go the extra mile in terms of assisting with more frequent visits. You know, it was all down to resource really, but obviously the higher spending key accounts, we would look to offer that, you know, go that extra mile where we could.
You referred there to complimentary visits. Does that mean that for other accounts, Siderise would charge for provision of site services and site visits?
No, they're always complimentary, but they were limited. You know, again, depending on order value. If you had a project that was an 18-month program with 6 blocks, having 3 complimentary inspections throughout that period is not really going to be sufficient. So, you know, that's down to myself, the account manager, to agree on the level and frequency of visits up front with the project management team. And you know, we maybe then increase to doing 2 per block rather than it being 2 throughout the whole duration of the project program. It was just something that we'd sort out at an early stage and look to confirm. And again, it's depending on project program and overall project value to Siderise, whether or not there was you know, resource that could be pumped in to facilitate the inspection needs.
Yes, I see. Now, returning to your witness statement at SIL 50304, page 1, paragraph 4, you say there in the 3rd line down, at the time of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment in 2015, my focus was on growing Siderise's market share. This included converting our business from distribution-led inquiries stroke sales to direct inquiries stroke sales where appropriate. Could you just describe briefly what are distribution-led inquiries stroke sales?
We would, the market-leading distribution entities on the installation side, you know, we'd often receive inquiries for which were, you know, if we then required further technical info, everything was always dealt with then via a third party, and these distribution people that were approaching us, these third parties, they could be supplying 200 different products to the same project, so their actual experience and knowledge of our product was rather limited. So we'd prefer to always deal with the end user or the installer in terms of assisting with design, and a lot of our competitors are owned by these third-party distributors, so we also found that a lot of work that we would have put in with architects on designs and specifications that we would have felt that we'd secured, when the tenders then go out and they go via a third party, we were finding a lot of, oh yeah, we can price for Siderise, but we can also offer you an alternative, albeit perhaps not as well tested or well qualified for the job, which was a deviation from the spec, and we were finding that we were being undercut commercially losing orders based on that. And it was something I identified with my Hilti background of really only selling direct to end users and not engaging third parties. It was a strategy for the business when I joined and went into being more facade focused. Was, look, we need to be dealing with end users here, for clarity of design and getting things right. And they weren't really offering these third parties anything more than a credit. We were prepared to take these facade contractors direct because we wanted to hold the relationships with the end users, so they were fully aware of what our service offers were from a technical and on-site perspective, because a lot of that was being lost in translation with these third parties, with their reluctance to introduce us to the end user, probably for fear that they'd be cut out of the agreement. So yeah, it was more of a focus for the business for me to be approaching end users and targeting end users rather than dealing by distributors. It gave us no real indication of what projects our materials would then be used.
Yes, I see. You say at paragraph 6 of your witness statement on page 2, and I'll just wait for that to come up so I can show you the paragraph. My role is for the most part dealing with the commercial aspects of our customers' requirements. If I receive fire or acoustic technical inquiries, I usually refer these to our technical department. However, if I do receive an inquiry for a standard application, which can be answered by our fire or acoustic test data and installation guidance in our data sheets, then I refer our customers to the relevant documents. Based on my experience of our product range, I am able to advise customers on their general requirements. If there are specific inquiries I cannot deal with, then these are referred to our technical department. Do you see that there?
Yep.
And at the top of this page, we can see that you also provide at paragraph 4, the bottom of paragraph 4, training sessions stroke CPDs, and you've touched on those already in your evidence.
Yeah.
And at paragraph 5 that you conduct installation inspections and installation training. Is that right?
Correct.
And provide mock-up installation on site.
Correct.
So in order to undertake those parts of your role, would you agree that it required a degree of technical knowledge or expertise?
I mean, that's just standard installation and application of our products. I mean, if I wasn't fully versed on that, I wouldn't be very good at my sales job. These are all just standard things that are generally the process would be, design would be finalised by our design team, approved then by the project supervisor and authorities. And once the designs have been finalised and accepted by all the key stakeholders on the project, that's when I would, or our now site services team would then arrive on site, and with those set of design details that have all been approved, and then conduct the mock-up in accordance with those.
Yes.
So, and fully the installation processes of our products into specific details once those details have been finalised by all the necessary stakeholders, such as our technical team and the project supervisor and authorities. So I am responsible for, or at the time was responsible for carrying out those things, but only after the engagement from our sort of technical and design teams and the project supervisor and authorities, and everyone have been satisfied and approved those details and to move them forward to site startup.
Yes, I see. Thank you. Now, we've considered there some of the general support that you provided to customers. In terms of that general support, did you ever receive feedback, either directly or indirectly, as to the clarity of Siderise's installation guidance for cavity barriers?
Nothing that I can recall. No.
Now, returning to paragraph 6, there, you say at the 4th line from the bottom of the paragraph, and we covered it a moment ago, based on my experience and knowledge of our product range, I'm able to advise customers on general requirements. If there are specific inquiries I cannot deal with, then these are referred to our technical department. So can you just clarify for me where you draw the line in terms of general inquiries you can deal with, and when you think those need to be passed to the technical department?
Like I refer you back to my comments about how I frequently deliver CPDs and the scripted content within our CPDs that is authored by our marketing and technical teams. A lot of that explains what the regulatory requirements are and the application of our barriers. So, stuff that's within the public domain and documents that we publish, I'm fully versed on. But when it becomes to project-specific inquiries where designs may deviate from standard application or standard installation instruction, that's when obviously I look to then engage our technical officers and our wider technical team for their advice and input, which is then directly relayed onto the customer.
Now, you've talked about CPDs, continuing professional developments. What would typically be covered in such CPD talks?
An agenda for a typical CPD on ventilated rain screen would be what the regulatory requirements are, specifically how our products are tested at the product level. Then there's guidance on what tests are available to do full-scale testing at the system level. And we also talk about the functionality of a ventilated facade and how it needs to function for drainage and ventilation or pressure equalisation, depending on what panel type's being used throughout its design life, but then how our cavity barriers accommodate those standard functionalities of the ventilated facade throughout design, but then will act to perform a compartmentation seal in the event of a fire. So we explain how cavity barriers react in the event of a fire, and like I say, the general process.
Yes, thank you. And were those CPD talks provided free of charge?
Absolutely. Yeah, upon request, they were then and they are now.
And presumably that was also an opportunity for you to market Siderise's products to contractors or subcontractors, potential customers.
I mean, at the time, they were REBA approved ones, so we were able to talk about commercial elements to them as well. It was more of a understanding of what the requirements are, and then obviously how our systems are tested to the most relevant standards.
Now, we know that from the witness statement of Mr. Swales, and we don't need to turn to it, that the three most popular CPD presentations at that time were 1, perimeter barrier fire stops in curtain wall facades, 2, cavity barriers in rain screen facades, and 3, sound transmission in curtain wall buildings. So just focusing on that second presentation, cavity barriers in rain screen facades, very briefly, what were the contents of that CPD?
Exactly what I just explained. That was the agenda specifically for that CPD.
Thank you, that's helpful. And did you or anyone else at Siderise, to your knowledge, ever provide any of those presentations to Harley?
No.
Did you ever offer any training to them?
Yeah, I mean, there was meetings, which I'm sure we'll come to, that took place whenever it was, 13, 14, I can't remember the dates off by heart, where I visited their office. Part of my standard introduction to Siderise pitch, should I say, is explaining what our levels of service offer are. We would have spoken about the installation of our system in comparison to the one which they were using predominantly on the majority of their projects. So all of that would have been gone through. It's my standard approach and pitch to prospects as a sales engineer for Siderise. So yes.
Yes, I see. Now, we know that Siderise produced a range of written guidance. We will come to some specific examples later. Did you have any involvement in the development of any of that written guidance?
No. Those guidance documents are not authored by myself. No.
Paragraph 5 of your statement, you refer to providing installation training during site visits.
Yep.
Can I just ask you what topics would be covered in a training that was provided on site, as distinct from the CPDs that you've already told us about?
For installation training on site, again, we'll be looking to engage with technical to see if there was any design or technical advice that I need to consider when demonstrating the installation. Installation of our materials can, whilst functionally they're installed in pretty much the same way, how they interface with obviously every curtain wall and rain screen cladding system design and the subframe that supports them deviates from project to project. So we always recommend and offer installation training, even if they've had it before on a previous project. The offer is then available again on the next one, because how the system, albeit it's installed in the same way in terms of our manufacturer guidance, if there's anything that is bespoke to that particular project that we've dealt with at design stage, I would familiarise myself with that before then attending site to ensure that what I was demonstrating in terms of project-specific training coinciding with the mock-up that I would have produced on site coincided with what we agreed at design stage.
Yes, I see. And were there particular recurring issues with the installation of cavity barriers, which often needed to be addressed by training in such manner?
It's not uncommon if people don't take us up on the complimentary service. It's certainly not uncommon for companies that don't install the system on a frequent basis to then come on to us after they've installed a bit of work, and they would have said, we've had building control out, with NHBC out, they've highlighted these areas of concerns, can you pop down and just do an inspection yourselves? And then it's kind of, you should have got us in for the installation training at the start and you wouldn't have probably had these issues. These are all complementary services that are on offer to every single person that is procuring materials from us on every single project.
You referred there to undertaking installation inspections. At the time of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, broadly speaking, what proportion of Siderise projects would you undertake an inspection of the installation on?
Difficult to tell. It's a reactive service. It's I say, part of my sales pitch, if I want a better phrase, to prospects when I'm looking to bring them on board, even existing accounts. They are fully aware of the levels of service that are on offer. Some take them up on some projects and then not the next because they feel they're confident in what they're doing. For me to proactively be insisting on it on every single job, I'll be working 72 hours a day and many more days a week than I currently do, to be able to facilitate that, for every single project that every single contractor does. Normally, when we've delivered installation training to a specific contractor on a specific product, more often than not, especially in curtain walling, they're going to be installing the same type of their system, especially if they're a curtain wall manufacturer as well as installer in project to project. So how our system would be installed into that particular one on that project would be like for like on the next. Not on every single project we get the request, but if we did get the request, they may well have to wait a couple of weeks due to resource, but certainly we would honour those requests.
Were there recurring problems with installation in your experience?
There is. I mean, these, not be fooled, these are very simple systems to install. There's no rocket science to the installation of our systems. The areas of non-conformance that we commonly see are really around carelessness and workmanship, leaving 1-2 millimetre gaps, in penetrating our barrier with various subframes, which is, very common, is accepted on a lot of projects, but it's then making good where the penetration's taken place. 1, 2, 3, 4 millimetre gaps are routes for smoke and possibly fire to be spreading. So they're the areas of non-conformance that we generally see from project to project, rather than being a complete deviation from what our standard installation instruction is. So really it's down, the areas of non-conformance are predominantly due to carelessness and poor workmanship.
Did you ever take any steps to ensure that the recommendations arising from your inspections were carried out? Again, for us to proactively follow up every single one where there's areas of non-conformance. You'll see on which I'm sure we'll come to on the Wayland's house inspection that I carried out, my closing paragraph on that report was, please reach out to us once you put these areas of suggested remediation right. Again, for me to keep a log on every single one and follow up every single one is not really practical. We put our recommendations across, and it's then kind of up to the contractor and then the project supervising authority to ensure that that's been done, to allow for sign-off. Sign-off doesn't come from us; that comes from the project supervising authority. So really, it's over to them after we've left our recommendation. You say at paragraph 8 of your statement, that's at SIL 50304 on page 2. In the first line there, Siderise recognise that installation is crucial to the function of its product. One of the main focuses of the company is installation, specifically providing assistance to its customers. You then go on in paragraph 8 to detail a range of sources of installation advice that Siderise provide. And I'll summarize those now. Data sheets, which include written installation instruction, installation training, installation inspection, and then over the page to page 3, a YouTube video and an installation inspection template via the iAuditor app.
Yeah.
So a range of sources of guidance for customers, is that right?
They're all upon request, or they're in the public domain, many of these things, so easy for everyone to access. Yeah.
And we'll come to it in more detail shortly, but it's right that you inspected the fire stopping installation at Wayland House on that Harley project, didn't you? I'm sorry, I'm not sure that the audio picked up your answer there.
Correct. Can you hear me then?
Yes, thank you. And if we turn to your email report, that's at SIL 50321 on page 2. You identify there a number of problems with the installation. And again, I will summarize those, but if you think I've summarized them unfairly, then please correct me. But you deal there with installation in the incorrect orientation. The second bullet point down, insufficient fixings of the brackets, inadequate or no compression of the product, no RFT tape where the products were joined, and then over on page 2, oh, my apologies, page 3, the vertical fire barriers sitting between the vertical cladding rails have been cut too small, so air gaps between the fire stopping and the structure. In light of the extensive guidance on installation that Siderise appears to have deemed necessary, and the number of problems you identified there at Wayland's House, would you agree that installation is not a straightforward process?
It is a straightforward process. I mean, this was quite shocking, if I'm honest, to see this many areas of non-conformance in the system, that if you were to witness the installation of it, you would kind of query, especially with the installation guidance that was readily available to Harley, how they got so many elements of this wrong. So this was actually quite an extreme example of quite a astonishing amount of non-conformances here. I would say that this was certainly unusual to see this many in relation to this particular product.
Can we turn now to SIL 50227? And this, when it appears, will be a Siderise brochure entitled Cavity Barriers for Rain Screening Cladding. And we can see from the top right-hand corner that it's dated November 2013, issue 1. Do you see that there?
Indeed, yeah.
And is this a document that you were familiar with?
Can't recall, many moons ago. It's forever evolving, but yeah, I'm sure at the time I would have seen it.
And if we look there under the heading benefits, there's a list of bullet points, and the penultimate bullet point is ease of installation. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So would you agree that Siderise were presenting in their marketing material that one of the key benefits of its cavity barrier product was that it was easy to install?
If you can imagine having a sheet of rock wool, cutting it in a certain direction, sticking 2 brackets into it and then fixing them to the wall, whilst from job to job there may well be certain interfaces and obstructions, in terms of the actual installation process for that particular product, as you've probably gleaned from my short explanation there, that's all there is to it. And then joining up the joints with tape. There's not really an awful lot of rocket science to it. And there's a lot of technicalities that go into the composition of our particular product to ensure that it performs in the way that it does. But in terms of installation, it's a very, very, very simple system to install. And like I say, the non-conformances that we usually see, or that I usually pick up on from project to project, are general just carelessness. So holes being punched, stuff being treated on site, the product not being handled properly and being damaged, holes then appearing, and which are simple things to remediate and put right.
Yes,
but
I understand.
Qualifies a non-conformance when I'm out and inspecting, yes, it would.
Would you agree that presenting the cavity barriers as easy to install might suggest to a potential customer that lesser skilled installers would be required than it was in fact the case?
That what? Sorry, lesser scaled.
Lesser skilled installers. I'll put the question again. Would you agree that presenting the cavity barriers as easy to install in the product literature might suggest to a potential customer that lesser skilled installers were required than was actually the case?
It's interpreted, really. I mean, it's just, you know, advertising that the products is simple to install. It doesn't suggest that someone less qualified than a standard facade installer. It doesn't really lead down that route. It's just advising that it's a simple system to install, which it is.
You say in the penultimate line of your witness statement on paragraph 8, if we turn to that, SIL 50304 at page 2, thank you very much. In addition, Siderise have always, to my knowledge, I'm just finding that. This is on page 2 of the witness statement, my apologies. Penultimate line at the bottom of the page. There it is. In addition, Siderise have always, to my knowledge, offered their customers installation training and post-installation, if we go over the page, inspection, our full service offer, which outlines our on-site support, as in the Siderise Site Services document, which since 2016 has been available on the Siderise website. So can we turn to that document, which is at SIL 404265. We can see this is a document entitled Siderise Site Services, version 1, January 2016, in the top right-hand corner. Do you see that there?
Indeed, yeah.
And is it right that this is a composite document which sets out all of the services that Siderise offers to its customers?
Yeah, yeah.
And can you help us with why it was felt this document was needed in January 2016?
It was us identifying in the market that we were perhaps offering something our competitors weren't. We wanted to formalise that offer into an official document that we could look to communicate with prospects that we're looking to bring on board. And we felt it was something like it differentiated ourselves from other manufacturers in the market to offer these extra levels of service that we were already mindful were becoming more and more requests for within the market. And we were looking to develop an offer to meet those market demands.
This is, as we can see from the top right-hand corner, version 1. So would it be fair to say that this was the first time that Siderise had published one composite document?
An official document to outline our offer, but that's certainly not to say that the contents within this document were not available at a much earlier stage. It was just something that was more formalised as our company grew and our service offer was evolving.
Yes, I see. And it says there under the heading, the Siderise technical team offers a wide range of services to ensure that everything from product selection to final installation runs smoothly. So would it be fair to say, therefore, that prior to 2016 and this document being published, customers would have to make an express request to find out what support services Siderise could offer?
No, it was my responsibility to ensure that any prospects that I was bringing on board and my general account management were all fully versed on the levels of service that were on offer, and it was a standard part of my pitch to any prospect that I was looking to bring on board who would subsequently place orders for our materials. I can confidently say that the likes of Harley would have been acutely aware of the services that were offered to them, because they actually took us up on those offers on the Wayland's House project, which was prior to what happened at Grenfell, the installation that commenced at Grenfell. So they were aware of the levels of service that were on offer because they took us up on them and I carried them out.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I note the time. I wonder whether that might be an appropriate moment to take the lunch break.
Yes, I think it would. Thank you. Well, now, Mr. Kay, we're going to have a break now so that we can all get some lunch. We will resume at 2 o'clock, please. And I have to ask you, please, not to speak to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break, all right?
No issues.
Thank you very much. See you at 2 o'clock. Thank you.